Hello, my name is Joe Lewis. Welcome to the session on how to spar. I've been a black belt some 26, 27 years now, and over the years I've acquired a great deal of knowledge, and I've had also a number of people come up to me and ask me various questions about sparring. I've had students who are sort of like part-time, not that real dedicated, not that much into competition. And keep in mind, most people aren't into competition. Ask me questions about, Mr. Lewis, I don't have a good teacher, or I don't have a sparring partner, or I don't have the facilities to actually do my sparring. How can I become better? I have other serious competitors who write me letters quite often, asking me questions like, how can I improve my speed? How can I improve my power? How do I work a good game plan? Or I've got different types of opponents who are defeating me and I'd like to do better, or hey, Mr. Lewis, I keep placing second and third, I'd like to win first place sometime. How can I do that? You also have what we call the dedicated instructors out there who are very interested in a system, a method, a process, going about teaching a student from A to Z how to actually spar. Maybe you have a student who's got adequate speed, but he lacks confidence. Another person's got fairly good confidence, fairly good speed, but they lack power. Maybe another student who's got the mechanics of his techniques down, but he's having a little problem with fear. He's apprehensive. He's afraid of looking bad. He's afraid of getting hurt. He's afraid of whatever. How do you overcome these fears? Down the road, I plan to do another tape on how to critique sparring. We'll get into some of those more technical problems. What I want to try to cover on this particular tape is simply this. We'll do a little warm-up, then let's start taking some of the simple mechanics of the techniques. How to throw a punch properly, how to fire a kick properly, how to put that punch and your kicks together. And then start executing these techniques in relationship, always in relationship with some sort of a target, primarily another opponent. And then once you start working these techniques in relationship, how to start then integrating what we call principles. The two most important principles I'd like to concentrate on today are timing and distancing. I'll get into a little later exactly what those principles actually mean. When I use the word distancing, primarily what I'm talking about, at what range are you fighting your opponent from? Now, if you tune in closely here and watch me, one of the most important things in sparring is you must learn how to position. As you become more aware of how to properly position against your opponent, it'll make it therefore easier for you to begin to read your opponent's body language. There's many ways of communicating between you and your opponent. Of course, the best way is to communicate with good punches and good kicks and make sure you can hit your opponent without being hit in return. But a lot of times, just the mere way an opponent is standing quite often will tell you different things about what he intends to do. If you can sort of understand his intent before he squeezes the trigger to attack you, often you have the edge and you can get the jump on your opponent before he can beat you to the draw. Now just look at my position here. Number one, the word position basically means three things. Look at my overall position. Number one, we're talking about at what distance are you from your opponent. This is what we call distancing. Number two, you want to make sure you have a strong defense. Now watch my defensive positioning. Make sure that you cover your groin up. I normally like to stand sideways, facing my opponent, something like this. You can switch off. Notice that I'm opening my hips up, I'm closing my hips up. Your width of your feet, watch my footing here. A lot of times I determine the width of my stance. I'll balance myself on one foot, and I'll see how far out I can reach with my big toe without losing my balance. And that basically determines the width of my stance. If my feet are too far apart, I can't move fast. If my feet are too close together, I can't hit hard. So you've got to find that happy medium to determine the actual width of your stance. Now, so far as whether your toe, watch my front toe here, whether your toe points towards your opponent or away from your opponent, depends on your particular style. Now watch, as I'm positioned against my opponent, I want to make sure I keep my hands up, the heel part of my hand towards my opponent. The hardest part of my hands always facing my opponent. Keep the hands relatively high. You have a choice. Keep the hands high, leave the stomach open, or you can keep the hands low and leave your head open. I prefer to protect my head at all times, especially if I'm close to my opponent. Now I like to keep my elbows relatively in the area of my rib cage. Now sometimes I won't leave both hands up. I'll drop one hand as one hand comes down. I'll pull this shoulder over to protect the jaw, and I'll take the rear hand to sort of protect the other jaw, or I'll place it in front of my face as such. And then, of course, you can switch off as I'm showing you here. These are different ways of sparring. Sometimes I'll position. I'll keep this hand down low in front of the groin area. This elbow is protecting the rib cage. Knees are slightly bent. Digging the big toe in on the rear foot so I've got good leverage. I can move fast. And I'll take the rear hand and I'll place it up in front of the rib cage as such. Sometimes I'll raise it up to protect the head and down. Keeping this low. Sometimes I'll bring that shoulder up and I can roll punches off or roll kicks off. In other words, there's many ways of standing depending on your particular style or the way you've been taught. But the key here is how to position. Number one, make sure you've got the right distance between you and your opponent. Number two, make sure you've got a strong defensive position. I always believe in attacking from a strong defensive position first. So in other words, set up your defense before you can launch your offense. A lot of times there are sayings, all fights are won and lost on defense. Your offense simply keeps you in the fight. So please remember that. This is the art of self-defense. Defense comes first. As a matter of fact, in all the styles, you look at them, all katas start with a blocking technique, a defensive technique. Now, number three, the third aspect, the third ingredient of a strong position is what we call mobility, movement, being able to move quickly. Now, someone who's got good footwork is someone who can say this: I can move quickly in any direction, and I can move skillfully in any direction. So a person with exceptional footwork is someone who can say, I can move in any direction with both equal skill and equal speed. So now watch my position carefully. Look down at the footwork. Pay close attention to the footwork. I want to be able to explode forward fast. I want to be able to move backward fast. I want to be able to take a counter step to my right fast, or a counter step back off to my left quickly. Or fake right, go left, take left, come back right, fake forward, pull back. In other words, I want to be swift, explosive, and quick on my feet. Now, once you understand how to basically position against your opponent, now you're ready to introduce your opponent and begin to understand what's going on between you and your opponent. Remember this: one of the keys to fighting it is to be able to execute your techniques in relationship between you and something else. Now, let me introduce my two partners today. To my left, Mr. Larry Campbell, a black belt that I work out with here locally in the Wilmington, North Carolina area. And my other sparring partner here is Mr. Ron Weaver. Now let's position facing this direction, gentlemen. Fighting stance. This is a good little simple warm-up drill. I want you to try it right along with me. What we're doing is this: keep your hands up, assume a good strong position. Now step in, fire forward hand strike upstairs right at the face. Make sure that fist ends up straight in front of your face. That's your built-in defense. Follow through downstairs, lead leg, round kick. Step in, upstairs, back downstairs with a punch. Now from here, I want you to let your head slip side to side. Now if you got an opponent coming in with a technique from this side, you slip to the opposite side first, and then back to this side, and then let's pull back out. This motion going towards your opponent is called penetration. This motion when you pull away from your opponent is called clearing. I want good penetration speed, and I want good clearing speed. Now let's try that same technique again. Back up a second, gentlemen. All right, about half speed this time. Ready? 8, step in, punch, kick, double punch, slip, 1, 2, pull back out. The idea of this, after you finish your last technique, don't stop, don't pause. You want to keep your hands moving, your feet moving, or the target moving. Let's try that a little quicker this time, gentlemen. When I say move, let's see how fast you can explode in. Slip the 2 punches afterwards, slip the 2 kicks afterwards, what have you, pull back out. Ready? In and out. Hey! Slip back out. Try it again. The most important part of your attack is always attitude. Now, when your attitude is off, your time is going to be off, your distance is going to be off, and what have you. Now, I want you to step in, fire these techniques today. I'm not that interested in how fast you can move. I'm not that interested in how powerful you can move. I'm more interested in the substance of your attack. So when you step in there to fire these techniques, I want you to step in there like you mean it. In other words, behind every punch, behind every kick. That's what we call an intent. What is the intent of that punch? No one's taking your picture. These aren't photographic techniques necessarily. Kodak techniques, what I call them. Purpose of a punch, purpose of a kick is to do damage. So, gentlemen, step in there this time like you really mean it. I'm not interested in speed, not interested in power. I'll trade speed and power any day for what I call heart. Learn to put your heart into it. Does that make sense? The reason we're stepping is to put the body weight in there. All I want you to do now is add that emotional content called heart. Got me? All right, let's try it. In and out. Ready? Step back out like you really mean it. Notice I have a tendency when I pull out, I look down. A lot of people, when they pull out, they're always looking up. It's just a habit. Usually when I step in, my opponent's usually on the ground. Okay. Now, you warm up with that little drill. Now what we're going to do is a little adjustment. Sometimes I'll step in against an opponent and fire, and he's coming back with a spin back kick around in this direction, or he's coming around in this direction with a hook and heel kick or a round kick or a ridge hand type technique. So I don't want to slip and then slip back this direction and get hit. So what I want to do is pull out a different direction in which I came in. So if I'm penetrating straight in this direction, I don't want to clear straight back in the same direction. So this time, gentlemen, watch. Watch my footwork closely. Right at the end of your attack, I'm going to execute what I call a simple counter step. So as soon as I finish that last punch, watch my rear foot. I'm doing what I call a slide step. I'm doing it slow motion. I simply slide around to the side, sort of yielding the line of fire to my opponent, yielding the right of way. And from here, I pull out on a different angle in which I penetrate. Watch that one more time. Penetrating. After I penetrate, slip, slip, slide, pull out a different direction in which I came in. All right, let's try that once. Half speed, gentlemen. Position. All right, slow, back it up just a little bit, gentlemen. All right, ready? 8, half speed. Slip, slip, slide, pull out a different direction which you penetrated. Looking good. Now that slide step, you can fake and then slide out. You can double fake, slide out, or what have you. You pull off in any direction you want to. Let's try it a little quicker once, gentlemen. Position. Looking good. Step in there like you mean it now. Let's see how fast you can penetrate. You want to penetrate so fast he can't answer your attack on the wind. You can imagine you're up against a good counter kicker, a good counter puncher, or one of these big old oak tree type opponents who's not interested in yielding right away at all. Ready? All right. Now, after you have penetrated, you slide and pull them back out. I want you to finish off with a counter technique on the way out, what we call clearing technique. So the techniques that you use as you penetrate are what we call penetration techniques. You don't want to just stroll back out or move back out. As you move back out, you want to keep your opponent busy. You can keep him busy one of two ways. You can keep him busy by moving, because when you're moving, your opponent's going to hesitate. When he hesitates, he's not going to be firing at you. Or you can keep him busy with firepower, some type of a punch, some type of a kick. So normally, after I finish penetrating, I'm moving. I want to fire as I'm moving back out. All right, so this time, gentlemen, as you pull back out, whether you pull straight back out or back on an angle, let's execute a good counter kick on the way out. Let's try it at half speed once just to show them what we're talking about. Position. Back it up a little bit, gentlemen. All right, ready? Slow motion. 8. Nice and easy. Slip, slip. Slide step. Pull out. Counter kick. All right, back reposition. So you're plugging up that hole so your opponent can't follow you through the door. That's what we call closing that door behind you so your opponent cannot follow you through. Well, let's try it fast once. Think about exploding, coming off that firing line. Dig in. All right, let's put some juices behind this technique. This time when you step in there like you mean it. Ready? Yeah. All right. Now, we warmed up with this simple drill, concentrated on a couple of principles. Now, let's go back and start off with something real simple. We all know how to throw the kicks. Lead leg kicks, such as round kick, hook and heel kick, side kick. The rear leg kick, such as a spin back kick, spin hook and heel kick, or round kick off the rear leg. The axe kick, what have you. We all know how to throw the different types of punches. All punches are either a straight line or some type of a curved line technique. I favor the forehand strike, the scoop punch, reverse punch, or drop punch, whatever you want to call it, and the ridge hand. Now, once we've got these techniques down, what we want to do next is now start executing them in relationship to an opponent. In other words, start use a target. Now, this is how I want you to execute this first drill. Mr. Campbell, you square off against me, please. Fighting stance. All right, back it up over here just a little bit. Now watch. We're going to take turns firing a side kick back and forth at each other. We're not necessarily trying to hit each other. What we're doing now is you want to start working on what we call the mechanics of the technique. As you're working on the mechanics of the technique, how to step in. Maybe you're working a replacement step. Maybe you're stepping behind. Maybe you're doing a scoop side kick. Maybe you're doing a drop side kick. There's many ways of firing that lead leg side kick. As we're doing this, working on the mechanics of that technique, I want you to think about a mental principle. This principle is called distancing. Should I squeeze the trigger from this distance? Should I choke up a little bit? Do I have to fake to set him up before I fire that side kick? These are things we have to consider. All right, now watch. Square off. What I'm going to do first is I want you to step in and throw a lead leg side kick right at the rib cage. No head kicks today. No kicks below the waistline. All right? All right, fire about 3/4 speed. Back, be positioned down here. Now after you fire the kick, you reposition over in this area. Now I'm going to come back and fire a side kick at him. As I am trying to gain distance against him, he's going to try to maintain that same distance so we don't actually hit each other. This gives us a sense of being in unison, being related to each other. We're both using and executing the distance between us. Now keep this in mind, folks. I don't care on what level you're executing your techniques or what level you're actually teaching or sparring. It is virtually impossible to control verbatim directly what we call your opponent. But notice there's a situation that exists between the two of us. That situation consists of many elements. Notice that there's a distance between the two of us. Notice that either I am directly in his line of fire, in other words, he's taking aim with his eyes, so I'm right in his line of fire. Notice also, before he squeezes the trigger to fire a punch or fire a kick at me, he has to take aim. He has to have a sense of where the target is. And he's got to zero in on that target before he squeezes the trigger to execute. Notice also, before we can squeeze the trigger, we must have good balance. And notice also, you've got to have a clear state of mind before you squeeze the trigger. So, in other words, the situation that exists between us, there's 5 elements that I can deal with. All I want you to concentrate on today is right now thinking about that distance. I'm trying to gain distance. He's trying to maintain distance. Okay, Mr. Campbell, at about half speed. I'm coming back, firing a side kick at your waistline. You just give me a target and move out of range. All right, ready? 8. Then we reposition down here, back up a little bit. Now, if I don't like the distance he is, in other words, if I think he's too close, notice he doesn't have to take a step to hit me. All he's got to do is lift his leg, bam, I'm hit. So if I don't like that distance, it's up to you, the receiver of the attack, the one on the receiving end, basically what we call the counter fighter. Since he is now leading off, he's what we call a lead-off fighter. I become the receiver, the counter fighter. It is up to the defender to adjust the distance. So I'm going to adjust the distance that I feel most comfortable, where I feel like I can defend myself and not get hit. He's going to establish the distance that he feels. Notice he's choking up a little bit. He's trying to adjust the distance where he feels like if he were to squeeze the trigger, would have enough time to zap me. Okay, let's speed it up a little bit this time. Huh? All right, you're coming back at me as fast as you can. All right, back reposition. Now it's my turn against you. Now you're a little bit too close. Okay, let's try it. Now watch what I'm doing. This time I'll take a little initial step before I step in. Boom. Notice he stepped just out of range. Keep in mind, not necessarily trying to hit each other. We're going to try to hit each other this time. But you're using movement to make your opponent miss. Rather than taking time out to block everything, blocking gets complicated. When you block, you throw yourself off balance. When you block, it's hard to counter. When you're blocking, you're occupied. Your hands are occupied, and you can't use those hands for something else like bumping, grabbing, feinting, grabbing, punching, or what have you. All right, a little bit faster this time. Back. Let's go as fast as you can. All right, my turn coming back against you now. You got to move fast. Woo! Notice I'm staying just out of range of that kick. Stick your lead leg up here, sir. I'm staying just out of range of that kick. Notice I'm almost within kissing distance of that kick. So if I wanted to answer the attack, I'm within range to do so. But from this distance, I'm too far away. Now let me let my 2 partners try this exercise. All right, Mr. Campbell, back up here. Square off for fighting stance. Mr. Weaver, square off here. Put your best side kick leg forward. Now watch how this drill will actually be done in reality. This is a good warm-up drill to educate you, to establish that mental concentration between you and your opponent. Without that mental relationship between you and he, the execution of the technique is going to be basically worthless. To have the proper timing and the proper distancing here, let's get the proper mental focus upstairs. All right, Mr. Campbell, I want you to fire the kick back at Mr. Weaver, then reposition down here, and then you're coming back. Full speed. Let's see what happens. Reposition. Reposition. All right, you're trying to make contact as fast as you can. Good. Now, as you're doing this drill, what you can do at this point is start breaking down the process of sparring into steps. Now, tune in here and watch this carefully. I'm going to outline about 7 or 8 parts of an attack. The most important part of fighting is attitude. Attitude is 90% of it. The other 10% is effort. That's called, when I said put your heart into it, that's what I mean by the effort. A lot of people don't go for that. They go for speed, they go for looks, they go for power, and all those things don't mean a thing if you don't put your heart into it. If you don't put some intent behind that punch. What we call substance. So when you learn to move with substance, your opponent can see that. He can read that in your eyes. And he can see that authority that generates from your body. And that authority never surrenders, folks. You can burn a man's speed out. You can take away a man's power by keeping him off balance. But when he's got that real substance, when he's got that real, what I call authority, you can't get rid of that. That's called his fighting spirit. So part of what I want you to think about now is how to get into what I call a philosophical strategy, the philosophy of fighting. And one of the things that we try to educate people to remember is tap that inner strength. Tap that inner courage. I'll show you on this tape what to do. All I ask from you is give me the courage. In other words, have the courage to be able to will the power to execute on your own. That's all it takes, folks. All right, now watch. My partner and I keep this in mind. Back up just a little bit, please. Number one, to have a good attitude, you must be properly focused. What I mean by focusing is, I'll ask myself to look at Mr. Campbell. I'll just look in the direction of Mr. Campbell. That's called directing my attention. Now I'm going to look down at the floor. Now this time as I look back at Mr. Campbell, I'm going to try to target my attention on something on his sleeve. I'm looking back in the direction of Mr. Campbell, and I'm noticing there's a little American flag on his sleeve. That's what I mean by aiming my attention, targeting my attention, zero my attention right on something very specific. Now that's what I mean by properly focusing. Most people don't know how to focus. They have a diffused focus. They come into attack, and after they attack, they back off, and all they think about, God, boy, that technique looked really bad. I hope nobody was looking at me. Oh, boy, I look really slow today. Oh, I hope nobody's really watching me. Or they step in there, they hit somebody, and they get hit and turn. They get the wind knocked out of them. They come out, oh, wow, Judge, don't give him 2 points. Give him about 5 points for that. Oh, wow, that really hurts. Oh, I hope my girlfriend's not looking or something like that. Nonsense. See, what's happening there is you're weakening your mind. Work on that mental toughness. What I'm talking about here is your attitude. Once you're properly focused, and if you're focusing on your opponent, you're not going to do that nonsense between attacks. So between each attack, you get the wind knocked out of you, or you look bad, you don't back up and think about that. You back up and you think things like this. I'm going to get you now. I'm going to get you now. Or you step back like this and you just think, I'm going to burn you now. Boy, you're going to burn this time. Does that make sense to everybody? That's what I mean by being mentally tough. Pain doesn't interfere with your mental attitude. Being off cue, your timing is off, your distance is off, something's not working, you're not looking well, you're not looking good. That's not important. What's important is your opponent. What's happening with your opponent? Don't let him get off first. Now watch this. Watch the breakdown again. Number one, we must be properly focused. Number two, we must have a strong mental attitude. We must be mentally tough. Part of being mentally tough is you know you're prepared physically and you've got good superior technique. Those two things come together with, number three, a good strategic game plan. A game plan which you know will help you to eliminate your opponent's advantage. That's what a game plan is designed to do. Such as Mr. Campbell here. He's young, he's energetic, he's got a good spirit, and he's got a reach advantage over me. I've got to figure out a way to outdistance him and do something to keep his timing off so his spirit will dissipate. In other words, I want to attack him from the inside out as well as from the outside in. Now, without getting complicated here, let's get back to something very simplistic. Step 2 is attitude. There's many things that go into the book called attitude. Before I can get position, I must have a strong attitude. Number 3, proper positioning. So as you're doing these drills, make sure you're properly positioned. I've got the right distance. I've set up a good defense. And I'm set up well so that I can explode fast forward when I attack him, and I can explode backward quickly when he attacks me. That's what I mean by strong positioning. Today, let's just concentrate on this one element here, the positioning. Next thing is, before I squeeze the trigger to come off with an explosive initial move, that's the fastness, the suddenness of your starting motion, I want to try to set my opponent up, make him think something other than what I'm actually doing, so I can explode and come out of that shoot either quickly or deceptively. The next step is we want to concentrate on that explosive or deceptive initial move. Then notice the gap between the two of us. Then I want to be able to bridge that gap quickly or deceptively. Then I've got to get position. And the last step, folks, is the actual execution or the application of your technique. See, folks, there's a lot of steps between being properly focusing and the actual delivery or the execution of your technique that can go wrong. And we need a process. We need a method, some means of recourse. So when something goes wrong when you're teaching your students how to spar, you're trying to teach yourself how to spar, you can say, that's where it went wrong. I got hit when I tried to throw the side kick because I didn't set him up. Or I got hit when I threw the side kick because when I squeezed the trigger, I didn't really mean it. I was just concentrating on how pretty the side kick looked. Or I was thinking about folding a leg. Or I missed the side kick and got hit coming in because I just simply didn't bridge the gap fast enough. Now I know what the problem is. I could go back and correct it. Today, let's